The crystal glasses clinked softly against the fine china as my sister, Sarah Thompson, hosted yet another one of her extravagant family dinners. The dining room was bathed in warm candlelight, the air thick with the scent of rosemary-infused lamb and aged wine. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, swirling my own glass of red, watching as my brother-in-law, Marcus, reveled in his favorite pastime, holding court before his captive audience. At 42, Marcus wore his CEO status like a crown, every word dripping with the unshakable confidence of a man who had never truly tasted failure. His voice carried effortlessly through the room, laced with the smug satisfaction of someone who believed he was the smartest person at the table. "And that's how I closed the Anderson merger," he concluded, leaning back in his chair as a wave of appreciative murmurs rippled through the gathered family. He basked in their approval, his eyes gleaming with self-satisfaction. "Biggest deal of the quarter," someone chimed in. "Some people just understand business at a different level," Marcus mused, his gaze flickering toward me, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. My sister, Sarah, straightened slightly in her seat, anticipation lighting up her face. She knew what was coming. We all did. These monthly dinners had become Marcus's personal stage, a place where his particular brand of subtle cruelty could shine. "Speaking of business," he said, turning toward me fully now. "Claire, how's that little, what do you call it, consulting thing of yours?" I took a slow sip of my wine, my expression unreadable. "It's going well," I replied evenly, already noting the way my mother shifted uncomfortably beside my father, who suddenly found his roasted vegetables fascinating. They had long since chosen their side in the family dynamic, and it wasn't mine. "Still working from home, right?" Marcus chuckled, swirling his expensive bourbon. "You know, when Sarah told me her sister was in business too, I expected something a little more professional. How can anyone take you seriously without even a proper office?" Silence stretched across the table, thick and uncomfortable. My mother's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Sarah watched, her eyes gleaming, waiting for the moment when I would fumble for a response, when Marcus would win. "My client seemed satisfied," I said simply, spearing a piece of perfectly cooked salmon. Marcus let out a short laugh. "Clients?" He leaned forward, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Is that what we're calling the local coffee shops and boutique stores now? You know, Claire, if you ever want real business advice." "Actually," a deep voice interrupted from across the table, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Her client list is quite impressive." Every head turned toward the speaker. Richard Anderson, the very same Anderson behind the merger Marcus had spent the last 10 minutes bragging about. He had been quietly observing from his seat at the far end of the table. The so-called guest of honor Marcus had been eager to impress. "In fact," Anderson continued, setting down his fork, "my daughter's company has been trying to get on Claire's waiting list for months." Marcus blinked. His smirk faltered. "Your daughter's company?" he repeated, his voice suddenly less sure. Richard nodded, smiling warmly in my direction. "Megan Anderson, CEO of Horizon Tech. Claire's firm handled the Matthews Group acquisition last year. Brilliant strategy, by the way. When Megan told me who was behind it, I could hardly believe someone so young had orchestrated such a complex deal. But then again," he mused, "real talent doesn't need corner offices to prove itself, does it?" Silence fell over the room, absolute and unbroken. I could hear Sarah's sharp intake of breath. I could see the color draining from Marcus's face as understanding dawned. The Matthews acquisition, a $400 million deal that had transformed the tech landscape. And I had orchestrated it, from my home office, the very one he had been mocking only moments before. I had no idea," Marcus stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating. "Obviously," I murmured, allowing myself the smallest of smiles. "More wine, anyone?" Sarah's hand trembled as she gripped her glass, her carefully maintained hostess composure cracking. Our mother sat frozen, her lips slightly parted in shock. My father, who had always assumed Marcus was the family's golden son-in-law, was now staring at me as though seeing me for the first time. Marcus cleared his throat, desperately searching for a way to recover. "Claire, why didn't you ever mention any of this?" I tilted my head slightly. "That I handle major corporate acquisitions? That my little consulting firm advises Fortune 500 companies?" I set down my glass with deliberate care. "You never asked, Marcus. You were too busy telling everyone how successful you are." Richard Anderson chuckled, lifting his glass in a quiet salute. "And speaking of success, Claire, I do hope you'll consider taking Horizon Tech on as a client. Megan's been quite persistent about wanting to work with you. Of course. Marcus jumped in eagerly. Anything for family. I'm sure Claire would be happy to. I'm afraid my schedule is quite full, I interrupted smoothly, watching his face flush red. But Mr. Anderson, please tell Megan to have her team send over the proposal. I'll review it personally. The tension in the room was palpable. Marcus looked like a man watching his carefully curated world crumble before his eyes. The Anderson merger he had just finished boasting about, his proudest business achievement, was worth less than half of what I had handled for Matthews. And now, the very man he had been trying so hard to impress was looking at me with respect, barely acknowledging him at all. Sarah swallowed hard. Claire, she said finally, her voice trembling, why didn't you tell us? I studied her for a moment before answering. Tell you what, Sarah? That while you and Marcus were mocking my little business, I was building one of the most respected consulting firms in the industry. That the home office you love to ridicule has closed deals worth billions. I dabbed my lips with the linen napkin. Would you have believed me? Or would you have just found new ways to diminish my success? The truth settled over the table like a heavy fog. They wouldn't have believed me. They had been too invested in their carefully crafted narrative. Marcus, the family's business genius. Me, the struggling younger sister who could never quite measure up. But your clothes, Sarah said weakly, gesturing toward my simple black dress. Your car. You live in that small house. Because I don't need to prove anything to anyone, I replied. Success speaks for itself. It doesn't need designer labels or luxury cars to be real. Richard Anderson nodded approvingly. That's precisely why your reputation in the industry is so sterling, Claire. No flash, just substance. The exact opposite of, his gaze flickered briefly to Marcus, certain other approaches. Marcus's grip tightened around his bourbon glass. His carefully maintained image was crumbling. But I wasn't done yet. Mr. Anderson, I turned to Richard, ignoring Marcus's desperate attempts to catch my eye. I'd love to hear more about Horizon Tech's expansion plans. Perhaps over dinner next week. The new French restaurant on 5th? Marcus interjected hastily. I'm a member there. I smiled. Actually, I own it. One of my smaller investments. Nothing like running a major corporation, of course, but it turns a nice profit. Sarah's wine glass slipped from her fingers, the deep red liquid staining the pristine tablecloth. But for once, she didn't rush to clean it up. She was too busy staring at me, really seeing me for the first time in years. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my dress. Thank you for dinner, Sarah. Mr. Anderson, I'll have my office contact you about that dinner next week. As I walked toward the door, I heard Marcus's strained voice behind me. Claire, wait, perhaps we should discuss. Discuss what? I turned back briefly. How you spent years mocking me. Or how you're suddenly interested in my little consulting firm now that you know who my clients are. The silence was deafening. I smiled. This was just the beginning. The morning after the disastrous family dinner, my phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Missed calls from Sarah, voicemails from Marcus, emails from my parents. All of them were suddenly desperate to reach me, eager to clear up any misunderstandings. I smiled, recalling Marcus's stunned expression the previous night when Richard Anderson revealed the truth. But I had no interest in their belated attempts at reconciliation. I had a merger to stop. What Marcus hadn't realized, what he had been too arrogant to investigate, was that his company's upcoming merger wasn't just another business deal. It was a carefully orchestrated trap, one I had been setting for months. My assistant's voice crackled through the intercom of my home office, the same one Marcus had so gleefully mocked. Claire, Mr. Anderson is on line 1. I picked up the phone, leaning back into my ergonomic chair. My workspace might not have impressed my family, but its technology rivaled that of any corporate headquarters. Richard, good morning. Claire, his warm voice filled the line. I must say, dinner last night was enlightening. Your brother-in-law seems to be having quite the morning. He's been trying to reach me since dawn. I smirked, picturing Marcus in full-blown panic mode. His entire career hinged on this merger, the one he had paraded around as his crowning achievement. Has he figured it out yet? I asked, pulling up the latest merger reports across my triple monitors. Not quite, Richard chuckled. Though he might want to take a closer look at who's been quietly buying shares in his company over the past 6 months. Ah yes, the anonymous investment firm that had been steadily accumulating a controlling interest in Marcus's company. A firm that operated through a labyrinth of shell corporations, meticulously designed to conceal the true owner. Me. My phone vibrated again. Sarah. I let it go to voicemail. Your sister seems persistent, Richard noted. They all are. Amazing how success changes people's perspective. I signed off on another acquisition, watching as my ownership percentage ticked up yet again. We were close. The following days were a masterclass in corporate panic. Marcus finally began digging into the details of the merger, no doubt hoping to impress me with his business acumen. Instead, he stumbled upon something terrifying. His company was being systematically bought out by an unknown entity. 2 days later, he found me outside a cafe, one of my first consulting clients, ironically. You have to help me, he blurted, blocking my way. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something bordering on desperation. Claire, whatever bad blood there is between us, this is my career we're talking about. I took a slow sip of my artisanal latte. Funny, I mused. I thought this was just a little coffee shop last month when you mocked me for helping them expand. His jaw tightened. I was wrong, okay? I was arrogant and stupid. But please, if this merger falls through then. Then what, Marcus? I tilted my head. You'll have to work your way up like everyone else. Start something from scratch. Build a business without riding on your family name. His face paled. We both knew the truth. He had never built anything. His CEO position had been handed to him, the product of privilege, not prowess. My phone vibrated again, a message from Richard. Megan's team just sent over the Horizon Tech proposal. Impressive plans. Shame about Marcus's company. They would have made a good partner, if their leadership was different. I turned my phone to face him, watching as realizations settled over him like a storm cloud. You're going to destroy everything I built, he whispered. No, Marcus, I said smoothly, slipping my phone back into my bag. I'm going to show you what real business looks like. I brushed past him, my heels clicking against the pavement. The board meeting is next Thursday at 2, right? I called over my shoulder. Don't worry about preparing anything. I'll be handling the presentation. The week leading up to the meeting was a storm of frantic phone calls, desperate negotiations, and predictably, a visit from Sarah. He's family, she pleaded, standing in my doorway. As if that ever stopped you from treating me like an embarrassment, I replied coolly. Next came my parents. Think about what this will do to the family name, my father urged. The same family name that didn't stop you from laughing at Marcus's jokes at my expense? They had all made their choices. Now they would live with the consequences. On the day of the board meeting, I walked into the gleaming conference room that Marcus had ruled for years. But today, I didn't take my usual seat at the far end. Today, I walked straight to the head of the table, where Marcus once sat. The board members, older men who had never questioned his leadership, looked at me in confusion. Gentlemen, I began, clasping my hands together as Marcus slumped in his chair. I represent Quantum Ventures, the investment firm that now holds a controlling interest in this company. We've reviewed the proposed merger extensively, and we have some concerns about the current leadership strategy. For the next hour, I laid out every mistake Marcus had made, every rushed decision, every missed opportunity, every instance where he chose image over innovation. The board members' expressions shifted from confusion to concern to outright alarm. Therefore, I concluded, our first act as majority shareholder will be to recommend new leadership. Someone who understands that real business success isn't about corner offices or country club memberships. It's about strategy, precision, and actual results. Marcus shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. You can't do this. I built this company. Did you? I arched a brow, sliding a folder across the table. Because our analysis shows that the company's value has actually decreased under your leadership. The only thing keeping your position secure was this merger. A merger that, as of this morning, is no longer happening. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Shareholders demanded explanations. Marcus stammered, searching for words, but his voice was lost in the uproar. As he stumbled toward the door, I called after him. Oh, Marcus? He turned, his face lined with fury and disbelief. You might want to start looking for a new country club membership. The one you have is about to be discontinued. In the aftermath, Marcus was forced to resign in disgrace. His reputation shattered, his influence gone. Sarah's once prized social circle quietly distanced themselves. And my parents? They called a family meeting, clinging to the hope that they could salvage something from the wreckage. You've made your point, my mother said stiffly. Surely we can fix this as a family. I looked at them all, Marcus, stripped of his corporate armor, Sarah, her perfect image tarnished, my parents, suddenly aware of the daughter they had dismissed for years. Fix what? I asked mildly. I simply did business. Isn't that what Marcus always wanted? For me to understand real business? But it's destroying him. Sarah's voice cracked. No, I corrected. His arrogance destroyed him. His need to belittle others. His inability to see beyond his own reflection. I just held up the mirror. 5 years later, the company had doubled in value under new leadership. I had merged it with Horizon Tech, creating one of the largest consultancies in the country. Marcus tried to start his own firm, but without his title and connections, he discovered the truth. Business success requires more than an expensive suit and a last name. He still stared at me sometimes, at my simple lifestyle, my quiet success. And now, finally, he understood. Real power isn't in what you show. It's in what you know. And I had always known exactly what I was building.